Hello, little Vickies. Welcome back to my channel. Tonight I'll be sharing some allegedly true spooky stories from Reddit. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and turn the notification bell on so you can be notified every time a new video uploads. If you have a suggestion, please feel free to leave a comment. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description. Now it's time to relax and get on with the stories. About 8 years ago, I lived downtown. Back then, if you remember, Craigslist had a personal section. I never really dabbled in that, but being curious, I did. So I made an ad, nothing spectacular, and waited. Not much went down, just some scammers and bots, married people, etc., but I get this one message from a young woman telling me how I sound interesting and she would love to get to know me more. We exchanged pics. She sent an older pic, but she looked pretty cute in it. She had a bright smile and big blue eyes. She was nice, I just wasn't feeling her like that. She was 18 and I was 24 at the time, but also she was 7 months pregnant. We enjoyed conversations for a few days and we decided to link up. She didn't live far from me. She stayed more on the northeast side, just on the edge of downtown. This day there was a festival going on. I asked if she wanted to go, but she couldn't because her legs were tired and kind of sore, so I agreed to meet her at her place. She lived in a northern slum. Not ghetto, but slum. The house was big, but also you could tell right off the bat that it was used as apartments. It wasn't an appealing house, but there weren't many other appealing ones either. When I told her I'm outside, I see her come onto the front porch. She was a small thing, all of about 5 feet tall, with dark hair, couldn't be more than 90 to 110 pounds, and that was because of the pregnancy. Her baby bump was very noticeable. She had a small chocolate Labrador puppy with her. They both were happy to see me. When I got close to her, I was surprised. She didn't have the same bright smile I saw in her pics. Her teeth were gray and her face looked like someone who was into heavy drugs. Her eyes still had light to them, but overall she looked like a tired human being, and not in the fatigued sense. I gave her a hug, made sure to watch my strength, and we went into the place. There was nothing sketchy about it, but it stunk, like animals and weed. We went upstairs and I saw a couple there. They shut their door and it seemed like they were arguing. All the rooms upstairs seemed small and the ceilings were slanted. Her room was fitted pretty nice. She was a smoker and I smelled the ashtray stench. We decided to watch Pineapple Express. That was my first time seeing that movie. She complained about her legs a lot. I saw some little swelling on them, so I gave her legs a rub. I used her body lotion. She loved it and appreciated it big time. We talked, and it was getting late, and I wanted to head out to downtown and catch the heat of the festivities. She looked like she enjoyed my company a lot, and as we were waving goodbye, for some reason I just said to myself, "Man, that chick seems troubled." I thought of burning sage when I got home. Like 2 days later, she hit me up saying her ex-boyfriend got kicked out of his place and he needed somewhere to stay. So me and her hanging out couldn't happen again. Which I didn't care. I just told her I understood and make sure she's safe. I left to Chicago to spend some time with family. I came back a week later, and after getting my hair retwisted, I saw a realty sign with her last name on it when I was out for a walk. She had a unique last name. I decided to check on her. I sent her an email. No response. About 5 minutes later, I opened up Facebook, and as I scrolled, I stopped immediately because I saw that very picture she first sent me. I'm like, what the hell is that pic doing on here? I click a link saying there was a triple homicide. I sat on the curb and was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I read the details and was absolutely shocked. She met a guy on Craigslist for sex. Her ex met up with him too, supposedly. He killed the ex-boyfriend and decapitated him, left his body at a park I was familiar with. He took her and held her captive in his basement. He tortured her for a week. What made me so pissed was that he went to a sports bar down the street from me and told the bartenders how he has someone locked up in his basement right now. Nobody took it serious enough to call the police. That probably could have saved her. He strangled her and stuffed her in a suitcase. By then the police figured him out and he was on the run. When they stopped his car, he decided to take himself out. They found him probably because of the emails from Craigslist. I know they investigated my email. I deleted it immediately once I took all this in. About a month later, I was on Craigslist and I saw in the miscellaneous section about meeting scammers and such. I posted a reply about people being careful and I posted her story. Also around then, I had a guy I went to high school with who got caught robbing people for money on there. When I summarized her story, I get a reply. It was from a lady demanding to know what I know. I come to find out it was her aunt. She wanted to talk on the phone, so I did. I gave her my condolences and told her about the time we spent together. She told me her ex was pimping her out. Her life never was like that. Her parents were good people and confused that she took that path in life. That girl was just a baby. I've been around death before, but nothing like that. Because what if I kept hanging out with her? The crazier parts are, the guy had another woman in his place, but she escaped. She was living with him, and he made her a sex slave. But also, he was supposed to fly to Vegas to meet a lady from a fetish site. But there were complications on his end. The day he committed the murder, he contacted the lady and told her he wanted to meet her ASAP. He was paying for the travel and everything, but she needed his info. She didn't go through with it, but she looked him up and happened to see his connection with a triple homicide. What's even more dark is that they didn't find her ex-boyfriend's head at the park, just his body. They found his head north of the city in 2019, like 25 miles away from his dead body. Why did he take that head? What did he do with it to travel with it like that? The awkward thing is that there was a lady who lived with me a year later after that. Things were complicated and I had to kick her out. She moved into the exact room that chick was in. I know because I had to come over there to give her something she left. This is also the girl that played a major part in my sister and her ex-boyfriend breaking up for good. People do come into your life for a reason, I suppose. I used Craigslist for business and some social events, but after that my approach became entirely different, and I became very cautious on who I met. When I was 18, I moved to live with my dad. He lived in a basement-level apartment in a pretty run-down small city. It's kind of notorious for being a dangerous place. I'd heard gunshots on occasion and passed by used syringes like they were cigarette butts. A lot of weird and creepy things happened to me and around me while I lived out there, but I'll stick to the one story that came to mind. I had gotten in the habit of walking around town aimlessly. It was a means of occupying myself and exploring the sights. I could get cool pictures of graffiti, and since I wasn't in school or working at the time, it was its own joy. But there was one night where I had strayed a little too far and was coming up on the rail tracks. There was a group of 3 of what I assumed were homeless individuals walking toward me. I meant to pass them, trying to avoid eye contact, but when I peeked up, I noticed the other woman in the middle of the 2 odd-looking men staring at me. Looking at me dead in the eyes, the woman stopped and said my name. It was clear and almost friendly, but creepy as hell. I walked, but couldn't get it out of my head. I tried thinking maybe she said a word that sounds like my name, but I have a pretty unique name to begin with. The fact that she was staring at me, I don't know, it was like she knew me. It didn't help that the railroad was right next to the town cemetery. I'm a want-to-believe type person, even though I usually don't, but that experience, as minor as it was, has chilled me to this day. Strange things were happening to me a lot when I lived in that city, and now I'm removed from it, it's easier to write off. But a big part of me thinks there's something about that place that isn't entirely normal. For a bit of context, I'm a single female in my 30s and live alone, apart from my pets. I'm on my own when it comes to my safety. So this happened last summer. It was around 11 p.m. and I was sitting at my dining table typing away on my final paper of the semester. Behind me sits my kitchen and a big window that overlooks my backyard. This backyard was surrounded completely by a 6-foot vinyl privacy fence. And inside that fence was a little garden I'd been working hard on. Lots of cute flowers and a little pond. I was proud of it and would leave the blinds open so I could take in all my hard work during the day. I was caught up in my paper that was due by midnight, and since it was late, the dogs were snoozing away nearby. My concentration was broken by a very sudden, very loud, and very deliberate tap, 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 tap behind me. I froze completely, and it dawned on me I'd never closed my blinds. All my interior lights were on, and we know how that works. Whoever was tapping could see me perfectly. Weirdly and inconveniently enough, my dogs, who normally bark at the slightest noise, were still sound asleep. It took me about 5 minutes to muster the slightest ounce of courage to turn my head just enough to see the window in my periphery, only to hear a loud crunch and another couple of taps just a bit lighter. Nope, fuck that. No need to look. The last thing I needed to see was a face pressed up against that window. To my left was a door to the carport which led to the backyard. The handle was within arm's reach, and I wouldn't have to look at the window to open it. I called to my dogs, and they jumped up as soon as I turned the knob. I guess the watcher realized what I did. About 30 seconds passed, and I heard a couple more crunches, then a very loud thud. If you've ever heard a vinyl fence being smacked against, it's a bit distinctive, and I knew they'd jumped it. My dogs finally went nuts, and I ran to the window near the thud, lights off and blinds closed there, thankfully. I caught a quick glimpse of a leg disappearing behind the corner of my neighbor's house. I stayed up until dawn with my metal baseball bat and one of those giant sharp grill forks. With the fence and dogs, I always felt safe. How they got back there so quietly, I'll never know. I've lived here my whole life and never had anything happen, so this has shaken me. Whoever that was wanted me to know they were there and definitely wanted my attention. I've since installed multiple cameras and motion lights all around the perimeter of my house. It's been quiet since. I feel better, but that illusion of safety has all but disappeared. In 2001, I was sentenced to 8 years prison in Florida. Yes, I was a dumbass. A few years in, I got transferred to a close management camp, Florida State Prison. To make a long story short, I was given a job working on the wax squad. We would be let out of our cells at night to wax and clean the floors. Depending on who was working, we would be assigned wings to wax each night. The two best wings were G-Wing and X-Wing. G-Wing is death row, and X-Wing is max lockdown. G-Wing, being death row, was usually kept clean and always quiet. X-Wing was small, so not much needed to be done. Anyways, in December 2005, I was assigned to G-Wing, and every night after finishing my work, the sergeant would allow us to run the wing and pass things from inmate to inmate. It was during this time I met a guy who called himself Doc. Doc would tell me about growing up dirt poor in Louisiana while we played Scrabble. I got to know him pretty well, as much as one could during the time we played. I worked G-Wing for about a month before I got the news I would be transferring back to a general population camp. It's pretty crazy that serial killers seem so damn normal until that switch in their brain clicks. Danny Rollins, aka Doc, would be put to death in 2006 for killing 5 students at University of Florida in Gainesville. He was the inspiration behind the movie Scream. I live alone in an apartment in Utah. My area is fairly metropolitan, and it's not uncommon to see unhoused people near my building. Since I'm a single woman, 20, I am usually more cautious about locking doors and setting alarms than my friends with roommates. I have a Simply Safe alarm system and also 2 deadbolt locks on my door. Because my area has lots of break-ins, I am also sure to always lock everything no matter what. 2 nights ago, I came home late from a night out with friends, but I was sober. I made sure to lock everything and set alarms like usual. When I woke up the next morning, I heard somebody in the house. They were wearing shoes and just walking around. One of my friends has the code to my alarm, but none of my friends have a key. I am the only person I know of with the key to the 2nd deadbolt on my door, not even my landlord. I leaned my head out the door of my bedroom, which is just a few feet from the more open living room/kitchen area where the sound was coming from. There was a man in my kitchen. He was about 6 feet tall and maybe 40 years old. He was wearing a full suit and tie, but seemed really tired or drunk. He was standing by my fridge and eating leftovers out of Tupperware and just kind of staring. I ducked back into my room and called 911. For the next 10 minutes, I stood by my bedroom door and listened to this man eat a bunch of food from my fridge. When he was done with something, he would just drop the container to the floor. When the police showed up, both deadbolts were still locked. They knocked on the door, and the man in my apartment answered. The police rushed him and yelled if I was okay. When I came out of the bedroom, they had the man pinned to the floor, and I saw that he had rearranged the furniture in my living room. There were containers all over my floor. The man wasn't saying anything, and he never said anything even when the police were asking him questions. After they took him away, the officer told me that the man had business cards in his wallet and he works at a bank downtown. The weirdest thing is that my alarm was set and my deadbolts were locked from the inside even when he was in my apartment. None of the windows were unlocked, and I'm on the 4th floor, or open either. I have no idea how he got in. Update. I apologize for the delay in reporting back. I have been in a back-and-forth correspondence with the lead investigator, and we were finally able to talk Thursday about exactly what happened concerning the man who broke in, who I will call Jake for the sake of clarity. On Tuesday of this week, the lead investigator of my case, Nelson, emailed me with this message, among other things. Don't let anybody wearing a hard hat into your apartment. I called him and asked if I could meet with him, but he said he was busy with several cases and would only be able to meet me on Thursday of this past week. We emailed back and forth late into Tuesday night and into Wednesday. I would email him back immediately, but it would sometimes take a few hours for him to respond. In one of his follow-up emails, he told me the man who had gotten into my house never worked at the bank in town, and they had tracked the business cards to another person entirely. Additionally, the man who broke into my house is unable to speak. On Wednesday night, all the tenants in my building received a message that light construction work would be going on for the next few days to repair wiring and plumbing. I told my landlord in a message back that an investigator into my case had requested for me to deny access to any person wearing a hard hat into my apartment. My landlord told me there would be no reason for the construction crew to enter my apartment, as all the work they were doing was in community access breaker boxes and the basement beneath the building. A few hours later, I got a knock on my door. It was around 10:15 p.m. When I looked through the peephole, there was a man in a denim jumpsuit standing outside my door. He wasn't wearing a hard hat, but he had on a tool belt and appeared to be some kind of construction worker. I asked him what he needed, and he said he needed to check the pipes in my bathroom. I asked him why he needed to be doing that at 10:15 p.m., and he said they were trying to get to all the rooms while the water was already turned off. I asked him if I could contact my landlord on speakerphone, so I knew he was legit, and instead of complying, he grew angry and told me he was just doing his job. I told him he wasn't allowed to come into my apartment and I wouldn't be opening it for him. I then stepped back into my bedroom and phoned Nelson, my investigator. He didn't respond, but I left him a message. I then called 911 and informed them of my situation, asking if they could come by and check on the workers. The dispatcher told me she would send somebody to my building. I then called my landlord and told her somebody was trying to get into my apartment in a construction outfit, and she told me they left several hours before. I went back to the door and looked through the peephole, and of course he was gone. When the police showed up about 20 minutes later, they couldn't find the man anywhere in the building. However, in the video of our entrance near the mailboxes, the man was seen entering the building around 10 p.m. Early the next morning, Thursday, Nelson called me and asked if I could meet him at the police station. When I got there, Nelson walked me back to his office. He had an iPad on his desk and a plastic 3-ring binder like I used to use in school. I kind of hoped for a classic manila folder, but oh well. He opened the binder and flipped through some pages before settling and looking at me. Nelson then told me the man who got into my apartment was named Jake, and that he is unable to speak but is fluent in ASL. He can hear perfectly fine, and he typically carries a notebook with him to write in for those who cannot sign. Nelson then told me how Jake, Nelson would not give me the real name of the man, got into my apartment and what the deal was with the construction worker. Jake went missing in mid-December. He works for the Nevada Department of Transportation. Until December of last year, Jake was a fairly respected family man. In his teens, he had been addicted to drugs, but he had kicked the habit and started working for the DOT. In the next couple of decades, Jake got married, had a child, and lived fairly comfortably. However, he had relapsed in December for unknown reasons, and soon after, he had disappeared. There were videos of him acting strangely at gas stations where he had used his credit card in the days after his disappearance, but then he stopped using his card after that. There's a 2-week period where they're not sure what happened with Jake. The next time Jake showed up, it was in Utah, where I live, and he was cited for a minor vehicle infraction. The next time they saw Jake, it was in my apartment. After they took him to the station, they had a long conversation with him where they would talk, he would write, and they would talk again. Jake failed to make sense to the investigators. He wrote about being hungry and not being able to sleep, and when they asked him how he got into my apartment, he would write about how he didn't need any help. Eventually, Nelson was able to get the story from Jake. During his few weeks in Utah, Jake had started going to bars and meeting some blue-collar workers in the area. He got onto a road construction job from his past DOT experience and met another drug addict named Patrick, not his real name either. He and Patrick both used hard drugs. Patrick has been known to get into apartments by posing as a construction worker, and he has sold stolen goods from apartments to pay for his habit. The night Jake got into my apartment, he was wearing a suit, and his method of breaking in was to look nice enough for somebody to just let him in through the entrance. After that, he would enter any unlocked apartment, step out of their window, and come in through a neighbor's window. Apparently, one of my windows has a broken latch and it cannot be properly locked. I also don't have sensors on my windows, so that explains why the alarm never went off. When Jake entered my apartment, he had already been to several other apartments. He was high while he was doing this, and he was hungry from several hours of sneaking around, so he went into my fridge and started eating. As Nelson understands it, Jake became drunk by just going through my fridge and eating and drinking. He also said the original owner of the business cards lives in my building, and Jake had stolen the business card case from the entrance of the man's apartment. Nelson said Patrick would likely try to hit the same apartments as Jake at some point, so it didn't surprise him that Patrick showed up at my apartment not long after Jake did. Nelson said he would be contacting me eventually for the trial, and that it might be a good idea to intensify security in my apartment until they catch Patrick. Sorry for the long update, but I hope that answers some of your questions. I posted this earlier this year, but I since deleted that account while I figured some things out in my life. Now I'm back on Reddit and I wanted to tell this experience again. This happened back in 2015. At the time, I was 21. Every morning, I would wake up early and go for a run. I had developed a route that was a giant loop. One side of this loop was up the main street of the small Utah town that I was living in at the time. My twin brother would go running at the same time I did, but he would run the loop in the opposite direction that I did. One morning, I was running down the main street and was passing this apartment building. In front of the building was a cluster of trees. My view of the tree cluster and the building was obscured by a tall hedge, so I couldn't really see them until I was right in front of the building and past the tall hedge. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a woman standing among the trees and staring at me. A chill runs up my back as I keep my eyes forward, as I don't want to be rude and look back at her. It feels as if she follows me as I run past. I keep on running, and this creepy encounter slips from my mind. I pass my twin about 2 miles later and finish my run. I get home and my twin isn't back yet, which I find strange because he normally beats me back since he is in better shape than I was at the time. He shows up an hour later and tells me what happened to him. Since the direction he was running in does not have a giant hedge to obscure his view, he sees the woman among the trees, only she wasn't standing like I had perceived. She is hanging by her neck. As my twin gets closer to the trees and realizes what he has seen, a man comes running out of one of the apartments, wailing. He picks her up and sets her on the ground and lets out wails of mourning. My twin calls the police and stays to give a report. Although I didn't realize what I had seen out of the corner of my eye that morning until my twin told me, I think back on that and a chill runs up my back as I remember the stare I saw out of the corner of my eye from the woman who was not alive. 4 years ago, after just getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career, so I moved to a big city that was 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I came into the company as a trainee. I was very demotivated, and I missed my family a lot. At some point, I decided to go visit the relatives who lived by the coast, which was a 4 to 5 hour drive away in a car. I didn't have a car, and the buses were expensive, but my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another city that was close to their town. I went there and found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than me. The day for the trip came. I met them, and in total it was 5 of us in a wide sedan, a lady who was studying medicine, the owner of the car, her boyfriend, the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy who found their ad on Facebook. Let's call him Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking extremely often. So inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, "Sorry to ask, but none of you have drunk recently or plan to do it on our trip, right?" The driver assured me that he was fully sober and that he wouldn't have any even if the passengers did. After hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured that they wouldn't drink because their parents were very strict and wouldn't let them misbehave. Mark giggled when hearing that and whispered to me, "Women in their town are infamous for drinking a lot and denying it." The trip went on, and we went around dozens of mountains. We had a few conversations about university and work, but most of the trip was us listening to a popular singer from the 90s. After around 2.5 hours, the driver stopped the car at a gas station as he needed the WC. Mark decided to go with him as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I see Mark and our driver come back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of cerveza. Well, actually, the driver was carrying 2 of those. I almost freaked out, but kept my composure and asked them if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and yourself take 1 or 2 if they want." Almost 2 hours later, we had left the mountains and arrived to a flat land. The sign said we were just 1 kilometer away from the city. Suddenly, the car took a right turn, leaving the main road and heading towards the suburbs. The place looked desolated, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't ask anything because I assumed that maybe we were dropping the other girl. They probably already knew where she lived. The dude just then parked the car on the yard of an abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. Are you guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down with it, but the girls kept saying stuff as, "I'm not sure. I don't usually drink. Oh, okay, I'll make an exception. Only because we had midterms and they were tough." I refused and said, "But how are we going to get to the city? You guys agreed to take me to the bus station." They said that it was already very close and that in the worst case I could just walk there. I was more worried because I planned to take the local bus at a certain hour and then get to my cousin's town, which was still 1 hour away from there. They started drinking really fast, and the girls got to the point where they were trying to pee doing a handstand against a wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out there and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone signal there, so I had to wait for these guys and see what they could offer me. They finally decided it was time to go home. I said it wasn't okay for any of them to drive anymore because they were all drunk and I offered to drive. However, the driver said, "It's not up to me. The car belongs to my girlfriend." However, his girlfriend refused, saying that she didn't even know me and her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I said I understood that, but that we had to sort this out somehow. After a bit, the driver finally got off from the driver's seat. I assumed they would let me drive. I was sitting in the middle of the back seats, so I asked the guys next to me to let me get off the car. The sophomore girl, who was to my left, did, but before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. The girl started saying, "Friend, please let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside anymore." The other girl said, "Okay, sure, but go slow, okay?" The previous driver got into the back seat with me and confined me back to the middle seat. I was getting upset and wanted to stop her, but I didn't know how to because everyone seemed okay with this idea. My panic got even worse when this sophomore girl started asking them how to turn on the car and how to operate it. "You don't know how to drive a car?" I asked in despair. "No, I don't. It's my first time trying. My parents haven't let me learn," she answered. "Get down then, please. I have a driver's license. I can get you home safely," I said. Then the car's owner told me I couldn't decide over her car and said that it would be okay, that there was almost no one out driving at this hour and that they would help her friend learn how to drive. I asked them to let me get off the car, but they wouldn't let me. They swore it was a very short drive and that we would go slowly and that it would be okay. The girl really had no idea how to drive. Unfortunately, this was an automatic transmission car. Had it been a manual one, and she probably wouldn't have been able to even move it. And the car moved, but in the ways you would expect for it to move with a driver who had never stepped on the pedals of an actual car. She would hit the brake and steer the wheel too hard. She drove on the middle of the road and kept freaking out while the others yelled at her what to do. I was begging them to let me get off the car, but they wouldn't listen to me. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help fear that if any car came, we would for sure crash against it. Eventually, we made it to the street where the bus station was. As soon as they pointed that out, I asked them to just stop the car already and let me walk there, but they did not. They forced me to be dropped in front of the station. I don't even know how I could get out of this sort of situation if I was in it again. A few years ago, I moved to a relatively remote part of my town with my boyfriend. We owned a small section of the land behind our home which consisted of the woods, a creek, and general shrubbery. I'd take my dogs out there every day for walks, and one day came across what looked like a campsite where a homeless person would live. There was a basket full of sticks and what I assume was being used for firewood, a mattress, blankets, and tarps. It looked relatively kept, so I assumed someone must be actively staying there. I went off in a different direction and decided to stay away from that area. I had told my boyfriend about what I came across that day, and we were trying to figure out what we should do to eventually remove this person, as this was our land and we didn't feel comfortable having someone camping out so close to our home. We sort of forgot about it for a few months, until one day I was walking past that area again with the dogs, and curiosity got the best of me, so I went to have a snoop. Once again, I found the same layout, though much more unkept. There were some leftover food items and the remainder of a fire. I quickly left. The same night, as I was waiting on my boyfriend to get home, I was in the kitchen cooking and facing the window that looked out towards the woods. I thought I had seen someone standing next to a tree, but it was so dark and I have horrible eyesight, so I didn't try to overthink it. But then I actually started thinking. Our home and property was fenced, and that little campsite I saw again today, I freaked myself out. Could it be the person that was staying there? I knew someone probably was, but I didn't think they'd want to show themselves, if that makes sense. I carried on cooking and thinking about it, hyping myself up in a bad way. I kept looking around but couldn't see anyone, so I hoped it was just anxiety and my overthinking. And then there was a knock at the back door. We had a curtain covering the window on the back door, so I couldn't see who was knocking, and I wouldn't be able to see from the window where I was standing either. I went to the door and moved the curtain. No one was there. The dogs had started barking at that point, which, if you have dogs, you know that when you feel anxious, them barking can freak you out even more. I had Alexa playing music and turned her off to be able to hear better. The dogs were barking in the front room at the windows, but I couldn't see anything. I shut the curtains fully then and calmed the dogs down, but I was feeling very, very uneasy. Suddenly, a noise came from the kitchen, like someone was jumping against the door. The dogs started going crazy again and ran to the kitchen. I went after them. The door kept jittering and moving. Someone was trying to get in. The pole that was keeping up the curtain fell, and I saw a man wearing what looked like a white face mask / some sort of cover to conceal his face. He kept pushing on the door, and I was hyperventilating at that point. If I left out of the front door, he could run and get to me in seconds, so I left the dogs downstairs and ran upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom. I felt so scared. I was scared for my dogs. I called the police as I could hear the back door keep being hit and the dogs barking so loudly. I remember how I haven't even been able to tell the police my address before the noises stopped and I could just hear the barking but no more bashing sounds. I was momentarily convinced he had gotten in, but surely I'd be able to hear some sort of struggle as my dogs were 2 large German shepherds. Yet there was nothing I could hear. The police did arrive very soon. My back door was still intact. I spoke to them through the bathroom window as I was scared to come down before they assessed the house from outside, and I had to calm the dogs down before I let the police in, as the dogs were very riled up then. I told the police about the homeless person who lived in the woods. They had a look in the area and couldn't seem to find anyone or anything suspicious. That was until a few weeks later, when myself and my partner, along with the dogs, walked down to that campsite again to see if it had been abandoned or not, on the slim chance that they did have something to do with the break-in. And we found this. The white mask that I spoke about before. How I couldn't tell what it was. It's hanging on the tree. Gloves and boots were hidden in a bag which we found by the creek, soaking wet. Apparently all this wasn't there when the police went down there that night. Though the campsite, for the first time, definitely looked abandoned. We sent pictures to the police, who came down again soon after, but even though they had all this evidence, safe to say nothing was ever done about it, most likely as there was no successful break-in. We got everything removed from the campsite and taken away in a skip. Who knows what would have happened if the back door gave in? I still worry thinking about it. It's left me with a lot more unresolved anxiety than I already had. Hello again, little Vickies. Thanks for listening. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe with the notification bell on. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description. Until next time, be good.